All right, everyone. Welcome to the MAHA podcast here at the Ultimate Human Studio. I'm here with Gary Brecka. He's been so gracious enough to let me ask him a few questions because we just wrapped up our interview together. It was really fun, by the way.
Yeah, it was amazing.
So people that follow me, they know that I'm a man of faith, a Christian guy. I think so many people are hungry for truth. Mm-hmm. We always have been. But I've noticed that people are, when it comes to these more challenging conversations of faith and belief, much like with what we've seen with COVID and just kind of like the unveiling of the mask, I guess, that people have been wearing over their eyes, people are kind of awakening to just deeper levels of this truth. How does that affect everything that you do? Like you're leading many people, this big company. It's a big deal. Like how does faith impact what you do?
Well, I think first of all, it goes back to authenticity. You know, if you're a faith-based person and you truly believe that faith has had a dramatic impact on either your success or your purpose, your passion, or giving you a greater sense of contentment in your life, giving you a greater sense of purpose, then to not talk about it, I think, is very disingenuous. So for me, the reason why I'm open and discuss my faith is not because I'm trying to condemn somebody else that either doesn't believe or believes something different than I do. It's because people are genuinely curious in, what do you do? What are the daily drivers in your life? What wakes you up in the morning? What makes you do 9 cities in 11 days? And why are you still so energized? I mean, I would put my travel schedule up against anyone's. And again, that's not a measuring stick. It's just that when you're full of passion and full of purpose and you really believe that you're on God's plan for you, it is extremely rewarding. And I think the greatest piece of advice that I ever received was, if you want to shrink your problems, grow your purpose.
That's good.
And for me, your purpose comes from God.
Yeah.
And you know, I was saved years ago in the 90s, and it was a Christian's men's movement called Promise Keepers, and it was actually a lawyer of mine who tricked me into going to.
Sounds like a lawyer.
Yeah.
A good lawyer. Yeah.
He tricked me into going to this Promise Keepers convention at Soldier Field. And listen, I am certainly not, the purest person. I've been a terrible partner. I've been a bad husband in the past. You know, I've gone through a bankruptcy. I've made plenty of bad decisions in my life. But as I get older and I'm intentional about what I do, and I really want to make my mark on the masses. You know, I really want this information to get out to the world. And as a part of delivering that message, I truly believe in my heart. In fact, I know it, and that I'm on God's plan for me.
Sure.
And when God reveals his plan to you and your purpose and your passion align, everything else in your life falls in place. I have such a deeper relationship with my kids who are also on this journey with me. I have such a deeper relationship, better relationship with my spouse who's on this journey with me. And we still haven't figured it all out. Right. And every other one of the outward aspects of my life has improved. Sure. You know, my financial stability, the stability of the business, those things have all improved since I've centered them around my faith.
Yeah. And I think it's important for, at least for me, you know, there's this prosperity gospel that people like to preach because it sounds really good, you know, but all the things that you went through leading up to all this were not not prosperous.
Not at all.
Very tragic.
People think I succeeded overnight. I mean, I just became popular and well known overnight, but it was 22 years.
Yeah, sure. A lot of trials and figuring things out. And so I think for people hearing this, it's like God loves you so much as a good father. He's not going to give his children things that are going to harm them or affect them negatively, right? He wants us to grow closer to him. So there's so many things that I think about in my life where I'm like, I really feel like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is what God wants. And then God's like, no, that's not actually it. And you go through the trial around it and you start to figure out that like, I was actually making that an idol. That wasn't what God actually wanted for me. And I'm so glad that didn't happen, right? But so many times I think there's blessing in obedience. You know, I think there's these core tenets of what it means to be a human being. Like, and that's why I think for me as a Christian, it's like being filled with the Holy Spirit. There are things associated with the Holy Spirit that make my life way better, like self-discipline.
I so agree with that.
Joy, you know, like love, like all those things that like come as a gift to that. Like if you didn't have that, how would you expect to have any kind of life that would be fruitful or joyful.
And I think too that when you're faith-based and you actually give the gratitude to a higher power, a higher
Gratitude is
source.
a great word. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I find that the moments when I pray in the morning after when I'm done breath work, my prayers are prayers of thanks. It's not like my Christmas wish list.
Sure. Yeah. Talking to a genie.
Yeah. Talking to a genie and like, this is what I'd love, you to do in my life right now. It's, I sort of surrender that to him.
Sure.
In the mornings. And I'm only there to say thank you and to be grateful. And what's happened is, again, let's assume that for a moment, and this is what Bobby Kennedy was talking about the other day. Let's assume that's not true, right? Yeah. And but you wake up every morning and you give thanks, and you're grateful for the things that you have, and you're also grateful for the things that you don't have. It creates a greater sense of awareness of what's going well in your life, and it has you really start to shrink your problems, and it gives you meaning and it gives you purpose. So even if you're wrong, your life is so much more fulfilled.
Yeah, at least while you're here, it's going to be way better.
Right.
Yeah, very minimum.
And like as a scientist, I look at that, right? Yeah. You say, all right, if I take this, there's a chance it's going to improve me, but there's no chance that it's going to harm me. So what if there was a 100% chance that it was going to work? Or there's a 50% chance it was going to work and a 50% chance that it wasn't, but there was zero chance of harm.
Sure.
There was no risk. Well, then you would do it.
It's a sure bet.
Right. So this is the way that I rationalize, faith, and for me, it's worked in an enormous way.
Yeah, that was exactly. So I grew up in a Christian household, had wonderful parents, like faithful the whole way through. But it wasn't my own going to college and being in this, science rigor program where it's. You have all these professors who are saying like, well, this is evolution and this is kind of how there's no evidence of God and all these different things. Like you made it to be filled. Like,
I find there's no
evidence for evolution.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just look at the fossil record. But
I was just going to say, the more science comes out, the less
it's
belief
less
you should
plausible.
have in evolution.
Yeah, that takes a lot of faith to believe in that.
Yeah.
So, but it was the same conversation. I realized like it actually requires less faith for me to believe in this alternative option, and from a scientific perspective, that makes a lot of sense. And so it convinced me to kind of dive deeper. But that wasn't what saved me. Like that's what got my carnal mind to get in a position of surrender to where I could see God take over from there. But how do you kind of see this in terms of like with your clients or your patients, like in your clinics? Is there any kind of stories or examples where you saw that God kind of moved in ways that were kind of more like supernatural or just like hard to believe?
Yes. I actually wear a lot of pearls. It's strange. I have these leather bracelets and they have pearls on them. Sometimes I put them on to like, for example, I have a very good friend of mine that has been diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. And I got a bracelet for him. It's got a pearl on it. I'm going out to see him on Saturday. I'm going to put that bracelet on. I'm not going to take it off until I've completely healed him and put it in the rearview mirror. But the story of the pearl is very interesting because it kind of reminds me of my faith. Because when God made oysters, He made them to filter water, and they filter 75 to 100 gallons of water a day. And there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of oysters in an oyster bed. But every once in a while, one of those oysters will get a grain of sand stuck in the oyster. And believe it or not, they have a little rudimentary nervous system, so they actually feel pain.
Interesting.
If you poke an oyster, it will move away from you.
Wow.
And so it causes the oyster immense pain. And what it does is it begins to secrete a compound called nacre. And nacre is a compound that surrounds this sand grain and prevents the oyster from feeling pain.
Wow.
And nacre is what pearls are derived from. So it's the only living gemstone in the world. All the other gems are formed by pressure. This one is formed from pain. And I love this analogy because, that oyster turned its pain into one of the most beautiful and valuable gemstones in the world.
Yeah.
And long after that oyster is gone, that gemstone is still going to be creating beauty in the world.
Wow.
And it was all born from this oyster's pain. And so the other hundreds and hundreds of thousands of oysters left no mark
Sure.
on this world. We'll never remember them, but that pearl is going to live on. And so I find that a lot of people, when they're struggling in their life, they can turn that pain into a pearl. Some of the most impactful people that I've ever met that have been on this podcast, including yourself, they have some kind of journey in their life.
Sure.
And it's usually a journey of solving some kind of painful event. Maybe it was Lyme disease. Maybe it was drug and alcohol addiction. Maybe it was abusive relationship. Maybe it was a lack of faith, and they found Jesus. But that was that pearl moment for them. That was where they took that sand grain and they turned it into a pearl. So I wear them to remind me that sometimes pain can become our purpose. And faith for me is very much like that. Like when I want to leave my mark on this world, when I leave, what are the things that I could do today that would create incredible eulogy virtues for me when I'm gone? Well, one is to raise my children to be faith-based. And number two, it's to fulfill God's purpose for me, not my purpose for myself, which is what I tried, which my only purpose in life when I was younger was to be wealthy.
Sure.
Which is a very self-fulfilling prophecy. Faith teaches us, in my opinion, about delayed gratification. And I think that delayed gratification of always knowing that we're going to a better place takes a lot of the harsh meaning out of life. And for me, having a direct relationship with Jesus allows you to, lay your problems at the foot of the cross. You don't need a church and a steeple and to stand up and sit down and kneel and shake hands and
be ritualistic about it.
Be ritualistic about it. You can have a direct relationship with Jesus, and a very personal relationship. And I find when faith enters your life and you become a believer, it also allows you to take a much more honest look at yourself. Because when you're praying, if you really believe that prayer is between you and Jesus or you and God, you're very honest with yourself in those moments.
Sure.
And so it allows you to work on yourself in really interesting and very impactful ways.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to become a better person, a better version of yourself, become a quiet practicer of faith. I feel like that is the part of the journey that nobody talks about and goes missing, I think, on a lot of people.
Well, it's that whole concept of daily bread. Like if we are waiting for this like warehouse of supply of food in this example, like we don't rely on God daily. We don't rely on his sustenance to get us through. And I think he wants that personal relationship like you're talking about. That's where, like, I think the biggest difference between Christianity and a lot of other religions, it's like there's a few distinct things. Like Jesus was the only person that claimed to be God, that he and God were one and the same. And prophets never claimed to be that. Joseph Smith, Muhammad, like they never claimed that. And so getting back to this whole idea of like, well, what if he's wrong? It's like, well, if he's wrong, no big deal. But if he's right, man, holy cow! Like this is a living God.
Consequences are real.
That is huge. That when I get to the end of my life, and whether I left a great legacy or not, like if I get there, and he's like, I don't know you, like go away from me, like you're knocking at the door and he's trying to get let in, and you're just like, I'm good. And he's like, I'm good. I don't know who you are. And like that to me is like the scariest thing I can think about, because like at that point in time, like my eternity is set. And so I think having that awareness and a reminder in this crazy world, like my two prayers that I try to pray consistently is, God, like show me my idols, like show me things that I can't see, because like I can make an idol about anything. I can make an idol about my health, I can make it about my family, I can make about these really good things that like are not God, and all those other things are, if they're not God that I'm worshiping, they could be good, but they're not good eternally.
Right.
And so I think that's the first thing is for me is, what are my idols? And then the second thing is like, God, give me wisdom, because like he'll give you wisdom abundantly if you ask for it.
Yes.
And like that, what an opportunity. Like so many times, like I don't receive wisdom because I don't ask for it. And I don't receive gifts from God because I don't ask for them. And just like having the heart posture and the mental posture to just like ask God for these gifts that he's willing and already provided for us, but we're just not even seeing that they're there. Like that to me is such a groundbreaking thing when it comes to changing your health, because if you don't tap into that, like why would you not tap into that? Like that's such a cheat code for life.
It is such a cheat code for life. I think the greatest business novel ever written was the Bible.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, if you want to talk about triumph strife, entrepreneurialism.
Yeah.
You know,
Using money well and all that stuff.
using money well, using money for bad purposes,
Right.
which we all do, and the ability to get on your knees and pray for and be forgiven makes you a more forgiving person. I mean, when I first started on my business journey, you know, you would have bad partners, bad vendors, bad clients, bad relationships. You know, things don't ever go as planned when you're operating a business, and it becomes very, very frustrating with you unless, you know, when you're a person of faith, very often you look for the lesson in that, and you go, "Oh, God's telling me to
What can I learn here?
What can I learn here? What can I take away?
How can I love that
from
person?
this bad deed? I can love this person and thank them for teaching me this lesson," and makes you a lot less angry. You know?
Absolutely.
And it also makes you look for the silver lining in a lot of what you would otherwise perceive as negative events in your life. And you know, I'm going through a very tough breakup with my former partners, but when I tell you it's so compartmentalized, like I don't wake up every day and think about it. 15, 20 years ago, it would have destroyed me. It would have eaten me like a cancer. Yeah. You know, that bitterness. I would have held that animosity. I would have wanted them to be in pain. I wanted them to suffer, but I don't want that for them.
Yeah, that's amazing.
You know, but I'm also very clear that relationship will never be repaired, but it also allows you closure and to move on. Yeah. Right.
You don't have to have full reconciliation to forgive somebody.
You don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you also don't need to carry that burden in your heart. You don't need to carry that animosity.
Right. Because it only destroys you.
It only destroys you.
Yeah.
I mean, it just eats you alive. Yeah. So I don't wake up ever and think about it. I wake up and I'm back on my knees in gratitude to say thank you for all of the things that are going so immensely well in my life, and asking him to help me stay on his purpose for me and not allow my ego to drift it into my purpose for myself.
That's amazing. So with the MAHA movement, Bobby Kennedy getting confirmed and all that amazing stuff, he's coming from the top down. What can people do from the bottom up to like meet our government where they are and actually elicit real change? Like, what do you think we can do?
Well, I think silence is the worst thing that you can do. You know, especially in the freest country in the world. You know,
Not funny, but yeah.
We shouldn't hate each other for our opinions.
Sure.
But I think what Bobby Kennedy needs now is he needs a voice. I mean, he has an amazing voice, but when I say he needs a voice, it's the more groundswell of people that are on board with this. It can become very unpopular for politicians to be on the other side of the aisle. I mean, who is pro increased rates of childhood cancer?
Yeah.
Who is pro ballooning rates of morbid obesity and multiple chronic disease in a single biome? And whose life right now, listening to this, and I would venture to guess that the answer is zero, whose life has not been touched by exactly the outcomes he's trying to solve? Who does not have a family member that is not obese or has suffered from cancer or has attention deficit disorder or has OCD or is plagued with what we would call a mental illness, or has suffered from depression or rampant anxiety, or who has hormonal imbalance, or is suffering with an autoimmune condition? And when you start to think, wow, if I just closed my eyes and thought within my own family, 50, 60, 70% of my family members suffer from these conditions. And the truth is they've never been given any hope and they've never been given an answer and nobody's told them what might be causing it. Right. And to actually be a small part of potentially solving that, maybe even reversing that. Yeah. In Singapore and in Japan, they intentionally solved their own healthcare crises. By upgrading the food in the public school system, by bringing chefs into the public school system, by increasing the amount of mobility that young children and prepubescent teens were exposed to, by taxing chemical-laden foods and by supporting organic and whole foods and by encouraging exercise and by limiting work hours. And they did all of these things that just intentionally just brought them back to the basics, and now their society thrives. And they have designed in the last 25 years the longest population life expectancy in the world by design.
Wow.
And so I believe that Bobby Kennedy is ordained. I mean, I believe that he is absolutely there for a reason. He's fulfilling his purpose. I believe when he communicates with such a level of sincerity.
Yeah. Feel it.
I can feel that.
Yeah.
And if you take a step back and you're like, well, what does he have to gain or to, he's in his 70s. He's at the tail end of his career.
Right.
This is his legacy.
Taking some heat.
Yeah. He's taken a lot of heat. An entire class and party that he supported for decades is now just abandoned him.
Yeah.
And you got to wonder how that many people turn on you for, I think that's the devil's work.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. I always tell people, like, when you start looking at this in depth, you see this as an attack on life directly.
Yeah.
And I think you got to know your enemy to, like, have a good battle plan. And I think not to single out and saying, like, the Democrats are enemies or Republicans are enemies. Like, it's not even about that. It's not even about money, like we were saying in your podcast.
I like how he says there's no such thing as Democratic children or Republican children.
Yeah, that's such a perfect way of saying it, because, like, if you truly care about life itself, then this is an easy problem that we can solve. Not easy, but, like, it's not logistically easy, but, like, in theory, it's pretty easy. Like, we have to fix all those things you just said, but we have to care about life, and we have to value life beyond our own and the generation coming up after us. I think it's just one of those things. I was just so surprised that people couldn't get behind that. I thought it would be such a, like, we're all in this together thing, and it's still almost a 50-50 split. And I think for people like you, and I'm trying to contribute to this, but, like, when you have that conviction, like, my first and greatest conviction is sharing my testimony of, like, how God and how Jesus changed my life. Because like, why would I not share that with people? Like you're saying, like, when you have that passion and you've seen
I've shared it a lot. Stage, like, podcasts. I mean,
yeah, it's like, how can you not share that? Like, it's such a cool story and such a life affecting thing. But, like, when you also look at food and health, like, that to me is second. Like, it's like my testimony of, like, who I am with God and who He is with me, and then health, because health has a huge effect. It's such a huge lever that can affect your faith, and it can affect your spiritual life. And if you don't feel well and you're being kind of poisoned, like, you can't even get to these points, like this hierarchy of needs. Like, you can't work through it. You're stuck on this, like, first level of hierarchy, and, like, you're just trying to pay the bills and just trying to eat some food. And,
so true.
And but as you go through it, and you kind of realize that God can be throughout that whole process. You can have joy and happiness and success no matter where you are. And I think that's where people, if they could just realize, like, the peace that can come through knowing your Lord and Savior, like, on a personal level, it's just one of those things, like, how can we not share it with the world? And having technology like this and doing what you're doing is just so cool. And I'm just, like, so honored that I get to be here, because
thank you.
It's so true. Like, people aren't willing to talk about that, because it's not good for brands, and it's not good for
them. Well, they also, worried about turning people off. I mean, I posted a picture with Bobby Kennedy and lost 46,000 followers.
Yeah. Oh, really?
I gained 105,000, but 46,000 people unfollowed me because I was at a MAHA ball, and I was like, wow, that.
So when I
was really
a year ago from now, I was at, like, 190,000 followers, and I start sharing my faith. And start sharing how I lost a client because I told her, and she knew I was a Christian. I posted a video about how I was a Christian after she had signed up to work with me, and she didn't agree with what I was talking about. And so she wanted her money back. She wanted a refund. She just didn't want anything to do with me. And I shared that story on Instagram, and it blew up. And I realized, it's like, wow, there are people out there who are so hungry for an opinion that they may not even agree with, but it's an opinion that is, like, feels authentic, like you were saying, authenticity.
Right.
It feels like it's something that we need to discuss and we need to go deeper with. And I think people are so sick of this, like, middle of the aisle kind of thing. I
totally agree.
The silent majority. They just want the truth. Like, they just want truth.
Or at least want to know where you stand. Yeah. And you know what's interesting is I think the most attractive emotion in a human being is passion. When I say attractive, I don't mean physically attractive, right? Not
draws people
not,
to it.
The most attractive, like
law of attraction.
Drawing emotion, the law of attraction. We know that it's actually authenticity by science, but to me, when I get around somebody that's really truly passionate, and their excitement transfers.
Sure.
Like, if you've ever seen an artist, I go to Art Basel every year. I know nothing about modern art, but I go because the talent is so astounding.
You can tell.
That, like, I'll stand in front of a painting or drawing or something and go, if I was given an unlimited budget and an unlimited amount of time, there's no chance I could recreate that. Like, how does your brain work that you transferred that thought to that? And it's amazing. It's really inspiring.
Yeah.
And if you've ever, been around an artist and they take a seemingly not so great painting or drawing or something, and they start to talk to you about like the conviction behind it and the motivation behind it and the story behind it, and you're like, wow, man, I wish I could get that psyched about something. I mean, you're amazing. Really, there's like that momentary sense of jealousy, like, man, wish I could get that jacked about something. I mean, I feel that now. And so I think that passion comes when you have a direct relationship with Jesus, when you have a direct relationship with God. Yeah. And I think you're also, you have a lot more conviction in what you do. You feel a lot more certain.
Yeah, and I think if conviction without that guiding light of the Bible and Scripture to kind of like, hey, you're moving in the right direction with your conviction is really important, because we can be very convinced of things and be very passionate about things, but if it's leading us away from loving people and loving God, like it's pointless, right? Like it doesn't do us any good. Like there's been a lot of passionate world leaders that did a lot of harm, right? Yeah. And so I think that's where we have to kind of keep that guiding light. So I guess just lastly, like what would you tell people who are like in the health space, maybe they're into this alternative biohacking stuff, and they're really more about, and I don't want to put you in a spot here, but like they're about spirituality, but they're not convinced of God and Jesus. Like they're not convinced of the gospel. Like what would you tell something like that? Like what was it for you that kind of like, this isn't just about like a creator and like universalism, but this is like, maybe for me, it's more about like a specific path. Like, would you say anything to that?
I would say, go through an exercise where you write down your eulogy virtues, not your resume virtues.
Interesting.
Right? Not your background and your education and your upbringing and your socioeconomic status. In your mind, imagine a family member that was going to deliver your eulogy, but you had the opportunity to write it for them.
Interesting.
And I think what you'll find is that a lot of what you feel is important about the world fades away. And you start to get a very clear image of what do I want to leave behind? Like why was I here? Why am I here? What is my role? And it's hard to answer that question without having faith in your life.
Yeah.
And it's a tough exercise to go through.
Sure, I'm sure.
To think about actually sitting down and writing your own eulogy.
Yeah, I've never thought about doing that once.
And it, well, I mean, you asked me, so that's what I would say.
That's my routine. Okay, let's go do it again.
Yeah, because most of us, when people ask you what you're about, you're like, well, I have a degree in human biology, and my business does $120 million a year, and I have 3 kids, and like those are all your your resume virtues, right? Yeah. I mean, it's like you're applying for a job.
Yeah, right. People are like, yeah, I don't really care.
But now you're gone.
Yeah, right.
And what's going to be said about you? I mean, what's your wife or your brother or your sister-in-law or whoever's delivering that message, what are they going to say about you? And if you had a chance to deliver that to them and write it for them, what would that look like? And you'll find that this will gravitate them towards, wow, faith is it's either the biggest part of or the biggest missing component of where I'm going, because I never really thought about my eulogy virtues. And I think it's a great exercise for people to go through, but it will actually lead you to really considering a relationship with God that you might not have otherwise considered.
That's awesome. Yeah. Very cool. Well, Gary, I've been very, just again, honored and humbled that you've allowed us this time and to do this a bonus podcast and all that. But even just showing us all your stuff and just being so gracious with all that. So we're very thankful. And obviously, I'll reference all you. People won't be, coming to me for this podcast. They know who you are, but I'll still reference you and all. But is there anything that you want to tell people about that you're doing that's upcoming that you want to share?
Well, I'm. As we talked about before, I'm building a community of like-minded people. Yeah. I want to build an army of people that will help me get the message out. And I think, the Bible talks about this too. How easily a single stick is broken, but many are unbreakable. And I'm not stupid enough to think that I can do this on my own, but I'm smart enough to know that I can do it with a massive group of like-minded people. So, just like I was telling you, I have a community online that I pour myself into. You and I did a private podcast for them today. They're called the Ultimate Human VIPs. And the idea is to build a community of like-minded people and to raise them up, educate them to the point where they're inspired to make a change in their life, and then to share their journey with other people, to educate them, to inspire them to make a change in their life. And I can already see this parabolic ripple effect that we're having in this community. And we talked earlier about how important it is to build communities, not just be an influencer, not just have eyeballs or followers, but to really build a community. So if they go over to theultimatehuman.com, they can join my community there.
Awesome.
That'll
Great.
be it.
Well, again, thanks, Gary, so much. And I'll do a little intro for you too after all this whole podcast. But I'm just amazed. And again, I'm very thankful to you, but this is just more confirmation of what God is doing. And I think I don't want to miss sight of that, because I think that's easy to do, to start like, well, I've done all these things right, and I've earned this. And I think there are components to that for sure. But it's, at the end of the day, just sitting across from you, it's like, for me, it's a huge part of my own testimony, my own faith. And so again, I just thank you for being obedient and asking me to be here, because I feel like it was God's plan. So I'm excited.
I agree.
All right.
Awesome.
Thanks.